Hello and welcome back. Before we get to part 2, Real Talk, please allow us to fulfill our capitalistic duty and plug our Patreon, the Contrarian Supplements.
That's right. For a small fee, you too can help the Contrarians rage on.
We have tiers ranging from just $1 to $10. It all depends on how much content you can handle.
Starting at $1, it's the Travoltis tier, which gets you access to new bonus episodes focusing on a new movie every month, as well as access to the patron chat. Join other patrons in making fun of our opinions.
Moving up to $3 is the Winonis tier, which unlocks access to our pre-recording notes, our video reviews, and our spin-off show, Contrarians After Hours.
That's a more laid-back space where we talk about other things we've been watching, reading, playing, thinking about. Sometimes it's related to the movies being covered in the main feed, but it usually isn't.
If you want to be part of those patrons who help us shape the show by telling us which movies to tackle, that's when you sign up for the $5 tier, the Embries, and the $10, the Gads.
Finally, all supplement subscribers, regardless of the tier, get access to our archive of special patron projects. Head over to patreon.com/contrarianprime now to join.
Be sure to listen through the end of the episode to find out what's coming up to the Contrarian Supplements this month. Now, it's time for some Real Talk.
I'm a month away from my 60th. I'm still the same rank I was at 27. For a lot of years, I believed that the quality of my work, what we do together, what I did with my previous partners, would get me what I deserved. But I don't politic, and I don't change with the times, and it turns out that shit's more important than good, honest work. So yesterday, after we stop a massive amount of drugs from getting into the school system, we get suspended because it wasn't done politely. And I go home and I find my daughter's been assaulted for the 5th time in 2 years. Because of the shit neighborhood my shit wages forced me to live in. And my wife can't help. She's barely getting through the day on her meds as it is.
You okay?
Yeah, Melanie's coping. Sarah's doing okay. She's dealing with it better than most kids her age would. But who knows what kind of long-term damage is going on with her.
Julio, one of the interesting talking points of Bone Tomahawk has always been the idea of how you would market it, or just the discussion around how you would market it, and with that cast, but also that subject matter. How do you present this to a movie-going public? And it certainly didn't have much marketing to speak of because it's a movie that went by for years before I discovered it, and a lot of people the same way. It had a pretty modest budget of $2 million, but there wasn't much fanfare, be it at festivals or just a general release that it got that drew a lot of attention. Its box office was reported at less than $500,000. With their movie here today, Dragged Across Concrete, much higher budget at $15 million, but still a box office return that was not anything you really write home about, at less than $700,000. I don't see that same conundrum here, though. I see now. I'm not even just talking about the movie because I have different thoughts about it, but it's kind of surprising I'd never heard about this, because you'd think this one would have been a little bit easier to, convince studio to pick up some TV spots for, or I think once they saw the movie, people might have been disappointed, but I think this probably, in your opinion, do you agree that this could have had a better chance to succeed at the box office than Bone Tomahawk?
Maybe. I posted this question, Alex. When was the last time you saw a Mel Gibson movie advertised anywhere?
Whichever Expendables he was in. So that's a really good call out.
When was that?
Ronda Rousey was in it, so it was probably before 2014.
So it'll be the third one, right?
Yes.
So maybe that's why. Maybe it's like a poison pill, like the famed John Travolta's box office poison.
Yeah.
Maybe that's Mel Gibson now. It's like, why would you want to advertise that Mel Gibson's in your movie? But then if you can't advertise that Mel Gibson's in your movie, can you advertise the movie at all? Because it's his movie. Vince Vaughn is the supporting character in this one. So maybe that.
It's a good call.
It feels weird though, because it is, on the surface, it feels like it would be a bigger movie than I guess ended up being. Although 150 something reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, people, I guess the critics watched it.
Yeah.
And I think there is a market for ultra-violent police dramas, right? I don't know how much of a draw like serious Vince Vaughn is, but I don't know. When was it released? I don't remember if you said. This was not a summer release, I imagine.
March 22nd of 2019 was when it got its release. Looks like its premiere was at the Venice Film Festival on September 3rd of 2018. So about 6 months separation.
I mean, it could be that the reception at Venice was not great.
Yeah.
And they're like, fuck it, we're cutting our losses. Don't even pay for TV spots.
Yeah, I was thinking about, you know what it wasn't Expendables 3, it was Hacksaw Ridge.
But he's not in it. That's different.
He directed it.
I don't know how many people went to see Hacksaw Ridge knowing that Mel Gibson directed it.
Potato, semantics.
It's worth questioning because Hacksaw Ridge, I mean, that was an awards darling.
Mm-hmm. And around the time of Hacksaw Ridge, remember he was in that Christmas movie with Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg.
Yes. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere because you're right. that was a sequel, right? So still kind of a safe movie because it was a sequel to a successful movie, and they were kind of Trojan horsing Mel Gibson into it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that he was the draw, and they can still promote that movie as a sequel to, what was it called?
Daddy's Home.
Daddy's Home. Yeah, there you go. So it's a Daddy's Home sequel. You can just show Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg, and I don't know, because there's two parents, right? It's Gibson and somebody else is playing the other dad. And,
yeah, I have it pulled up here. John Lithgow.
Oh, see, likable John Lithgow. So you can kind of hide Gibson in the background. People are gonna do a double take. Like, was that Mel Gibson? And then before they know it, it's I guess I'm gonna go see it to find out. This you can't hide, and it's on top of that is what we're saying at Rare Corner. Is Mel Gibson playing a character that kind of capitalizes on the problematic image of Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
So that's a tough sell, I think. Actually, if you're the producer, the executive that's in charge of marketing this movie, you're like, fuck, what did I do? Why did I get charged with this? They just gave it to the intern. I mistakenly, Alex, thought that this movie was the second one. What's it called? Brawl in Cell 99?
Yeah, something like that. Hopefully it's good when I watch it tomorrow and I'll be able to remember the name a bit more, or I'll care to remember the name, I should say. But yeah, no, this is part 3 in the S. Craig trilogy.
I don't know if you remember this. My roommate threw Kelly and I an engagement party. I'm pretty sure this was the occasion. And I'm pretty sure you were there. I know Eddie was there. Eddie and his wife, Kathy, and Jordan and Kinsey were there. And several of our friends. It was kind of like a nice get-together. And at some point, Eddie got it into his head that he wanted to show us the trailer for that movie, for Brawl in Cell 99. So when Paul brought up, because he gave me a few options over on Twitter, he's like, this movie or this movie or this movie. And I said, well, I actually have a history with this Vince Vaughn movie. I mean, I guess the punchline to the story is that Eddie created this major buildup to the trailer, and then it turns out that we couldn't play it. Like it was... We pulled it up on the Xbox, and then there was I don't know if it was protected or there was something, I don't know, but it ended up with him just saying like, trust me, it's really cool, it looks awesome. And I still haven't seen it. Brawl in Cell Block 99, that's what it's called. So anyway, this is not that. So I actually have zero connection to this movie. I don't know. I think I was aware that this dude, the Bone Tomahawk dude, had made 3 movies. Mm-hmm. But it was almost like going back blind. You said you watched the trailer, right?
I did, yes. And I had heard about this. I had a very vague knowledge of it before we watched it, before I kind of dove into my pre-research. But yeah, I didn't realize how deep some of the casting went. I certainly didn't know what to expect in terms of tone. I know it was like a crime thriller, but I didn't realize it was going to be longer than the Black Freighter cut of The Watchmen.
It's Craig Zahler put the pirate comic in it.
That's
the whole thing.
That's it, right? Tales of the Black Freighter?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, let's get this quotes over with so we can really dive into our feelings.
You'll survive. Though, I think it'll end our current discussions about raises and promotions.
Anchovies.
The People Against S. Craig Zahler's third movie. I'm going to start with Ed Whitfield from the Ooh Tray, who says, a pornographic celebration of immorality.
My God.
Man, you thought we sounded offended in Concerns Corner. This guy, pornographic. Next, Jamie East from The Sun, UK, says, it's uncompromising and unapologetically unpleasant, but it's also mediocre, boring, and tries far too hard to be controversial.
You could have just stopped at tries far too hard.
That was one of my notes for Concerns Corner. It was like, he did Bone Tomahawk. He could technically stop trying. But instead, he just went down the rabbit hole. Next, Pete Vonderhaar from Houston Press says, Officer Richman is a man left behind by his inability to adapt to the present, and the jury's out on whether the same thing will happen to Zahler. Pretty damning comparison. Comparing the director
rough.
to the Mel Gibson character. We're going to close with Danny Lee from the Financial Times, who says, the impression is that everything else in this headache of a film is only there to let Mel Gibson say ugly things on screen and thus, as they say, trigger the libs, a feeble use of Zahler's talent. I'm going to get defensive now with this quote. Like, I was not triggered.
No.
I don't even know. I guess if you like put it on paper, I am a lib. In the sense that I'm not a Republican.
Yes.
You know, there's only the two extremes, people. At this point, it is a war, apparently. But it triggered my eyes into rolling. That's what it did. I was not particularly provoked. Like, I use that word in Concerns Corner.
Yeah,
I use it every now and
say
then.
They didn't say anything, like, there was no lines of dialogue he had, even the stuff about the media and shit, where I was just like, all right, let's move this along.
Yep.
But, like, there's nothing that he said that from, like, a political standpoint or, like, from a moralistic standpoint would trigger me into saying, like, well, hold on. The dialogue was mostly met from me with the reaction of just like, oh, God. Like, you know, I get what you're trying to do, man, but it just does not work in this situation, this scenario. Instead of coming across as, like, you know, this new blowaway rookie, you know, huge prospect on the scene that you get, the vibe that you get from a movie like Bone Tomahawk. Here, it is like Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead. It's just like, I get what you're trying to do. Let's move it along. Let's try to do something maybe a little bit more original. And this just relies too much on dialogue that's not good and a good amount of practical effects. So at least I can't, you know, be a hypocrite. I got to give it up for that. But bouts of very unearned extreme violence, there's a way to go about doing those. And Bone Tomahawk, for example, one of the more shockingly violent scenes in a film I've ever seen is in that movie, but it feels earned by the time it happens. Here, it's just like rolling my eyes is a good way to put it. I didn't hate this movie. I need to say that right up front. There's a different level of expectation when you come in with the, you know, from the guy who did Bone Tomahawk. It's like, all right. And then, you know, say what you will about Mel Gibson, you would be right. But on paper, this is a very intriguing cast. You're like, all right, hell of a piece of business we got in front of us here, folks. And then watching the movie, it just became more disappointing as moments passed. I was invested, probably by the end, morbidly so, because I watched this all in one sitting, but it just felt like such a squandered opportunity when the credits rolled. Well, hold on. After the credits rolled, because I was too busy just fucking marking out to that Shotgun Safari song, just bopping my head back and forth.
The entire movie is an excuse for as Craig Zahler to pimp his musical career.
Apparently,
he's done with writing novels. Now he wants to move into the music business. He is he's Chili Palmer and Be Cool.
Sick reference.
Well, that was the last quote, Alex. And I think before we get into the movie itself, I mean, I think that the first aspect of the movie we need to tackle is that apparent like social commentary aspect of it. which I think.
Well, before we do that real quick, I just wanted to say that to piggyback on that pornographic and those reviews that chastise this for its violence. This movie was nominated for the worst reckless disregard for human life and public property award at the 40th Golden Raspberry Awards.
They're just making awards up. I guess they always do, but that seems, I don't know, maybe it was a particularly pleasant year, 2019.
So the winner of it was Rambo Last Blood. The other nominees alongside Dragged Across Concrete were Hellboy, Joker, and The Haunting of Sharon Tate, which I forgot about that movie until I read this. The one where Hilary Duff plays Sharon Tate. Yeah, woof. Mainly the reason I wanted to bring it up is because that's the year Cats dominated, won a bunch of awards, and then I guess you wouldn't say awards, you would say dishonors.
Yeah.
And that ceremony had to be canceled and moved to an online version because it was originally set to take place on March 14th of 2020.
Whoops.
Julio, yeah. I think we had an idea what was going on at that point in time.
Nobody was talking about Dragged Across Concrete, Cats, or anything else. Actually, I guess to its credit, we talked about Cats all throughout 2020. Well, I don't know that this movie deserves any Razzies other than maybe most perplexing casting choice.
Yeah.
Look, I think that you open up your movie to being examined as an attempt, at least as a social statement, when you dedicate a whole scene to complaining about cancel culture.
Yes.
And that happens pretty early in the movie. It's like Vince Vaughn, Mel Gibson, and Don Johnson. There's not even like any subtlety to the dialogue. And the fact that it's a scene that involves Mel Gibson, who, as we said in Contreras Corner, as you all know, he had a very public social trial. So everybody is aware of it. So it really feels like the movie and the filmmaker defending Gibson, in a way, defending the choice to cast Gibson. It's so weird because it just kind of taints the rest of the movie, because I was just second guessing myself the entire time as I'm watching it. I wouldn't second guess myself if the story was more gripping, right? Because then I would just be like all in the story. But because the story moves really slowly and it has these lulls, then it gave me time to kind of like pull back and start wondering, like, what is the deal with the Mel Gibson casting here? And a lot of it kind of came out during Contreras Corner, just what it feels like to watch Mel Gibson play this character and go through this. Man, you can't even call it an arc. It's not, this just happens to him. He's a cop, probably a bad cop. He may be a talented cop, but he's also a bad cop, and gets in trouble, needs money, and gets in more trouble, and then he dies. And I'm perfectly fine if you just tell that story and you don't, and that's the story you're telling. But when you intentionally or accidentally kind of surrounded by the meta aspect of having Mel Gibson there talking about cancel culture, then it just feels weird. Then it feels like it really, like, was there a point that I'm missing? What is the point, Alex? Is this story saying anything?
You ready? Yeah. Let's hunt some lions.
Right? Like, he's hunting lions at the end. Like, oh, the underdog got the upper hand. The black guy, the minority, got the upper hand on the racist white figure of authority. But it feels like that is not even you're not saying anything. Like, how did he get the upper hand? It almost feels like it was by luck. So I find that entire thing is just distracting. If you're being charitable, it's just distracting. If you're not being charitable, it's just lazy, and it's just like a detriment to the movie. It almost feels like tacked on, right? You just had this perfectly fine story of these somewhat crooked cops attempting to rob the bad guys, and then somehow find themselves in a situation where they kind of have to be the heroes. That's it. You didn't need to like add the other stuff. So it's just weird. It honestly made me second guess all the, Bone Tomahawk. Here we go, guys. I'm gonna praise Bone Tomahawk a little more.
Yeah, there's a lot to say here, so that's,
yeah. But Bone Tomahawk, it just feels like such a smart movie, and so it's just such a good piece of filmmaking. And then I watch this that's by the same guy, and it makes me second guess like how much I praised him in Bone Tomahawk. It doesn't mean that Bone Tomahawk is a lesser movie or the filmmaking in it is any lesser, but I was just like, man, maybe that was kind of like a fluke, right? And that's why I really want to watch that middle movie, because that's really going to tell me, can this guy only write movies about dudes? Right? I'm not forgetting a major female role in Bone Tomahawk, right? I know Patrick Wilson has his is it fiance, wife, right? That they go to rescue, but that's kind of it's a guy's movie. And then this is just very much like a guy's movie as well, only they're nastier. Like,
yeah, Lily Simmons is the actress's name who plays Mrs. O'Dwyer in Bone Tomahawk, and she does have some very good moments of acting and of character in that movie, far more so than any female in this does.
Yep.
But to your point, yeah, that movie's like the boys are back in town. You just think of like the quartet of the four dudes scaling their way across the desert. Or the countryside, rather, the wilderness, and Patrick Wilson's bone sticking out of his leg. Yeah, and here there are female characters, but they're pretty much summarized in Jennifer Carpenter's character arc here. The 5 minutes she's in the movie,
the 5 minutes for Laurie Holden.
Yes, it's basically because Laurie Holden gets to see. She's like crying, right, and like talking about how they're just there to be emotional and I think, react to situations like their lives. They're so overwhelmed by what their lives have become and they're very emotional, but they're just fucking dispensable. And the real thing people want to see is Mel Gibson, talking about percentages and shit.
Making crass comments about minorities and women too, and that's this is where I was going, and then I got sidetracked. Look, I maybe I am a triggered lip dude, because what it led me back to thinking about Bone Tomahawk. I was like, did I just miss an undercurrent of like misogyny and racism in that movie because I was just so fascinated by the story, and the performances and the cinematography and everything?
I mean, there is the really, really disturbing reveal of the women in the tribe, but that's more just to like express the monsters that they are, I suppose.
Yeah, I think I could see how you could make the argument that Bone Tomahawk, if you really wanted to like embrace the whole like triggering the lips part, right? That Bone Tomahawk is disrespectful to Native Americans or whatever, like you could just make that argument. I think Bone Tomahawk is a horror movie, and they run into like what in the context of the movie are horror monsters, and that's just how it is. Like I don't think that
just to play devil's advocate on that, remember they do have the Native American that lives in town and says these fuckers don't belong to any tribe.
They're you're right.
They're the victim of generations of inbreeding and shit.
Yeah. But still, right? If you wanted to be super sensitive about stuff,
yes,
you could say that. You could make that argument. And then you would watch Dragged Across Concrete and you would feel validated in having made that argument. Like, see? He is not even disguising it anymore. He just grabbed Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn and made him say all these like racial slurs and just act really demeaning towards women and Mexican people and black people. So obviously it's a very limited sample size, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm not saying cancel S. Craig Zahler, but I'm just saying that
I think the point Julio's making here is that one of the future after hours is going to be he and I watching that Block 99 movie and coming back. Yeah.
I think that would definitely maybe eliminate a little more. What does Craig Zahler have to say about this stuff? If he's tried to say anything, again, I don't know how he ended up in this weird tangent in Dragged Across Concrete where he started, but like, why are they like that? You know what I mean? Like, why do you need to humiliate I guess, is she deaf? Like, is she hearing impaired? Like the girlfriend at the beginning of the movie, right? She's in the shower No, she's not. She's in the shower. He like pulls her out of the shower.
No, she's not in the shower. She runs into the shower to get away from him and try to pull the gun out of her bag.
He turns the shower on, right?
He turns the shower on and then puts her
on.
Under the fan so she's cold and whatnot. And I took the thing of like, can you understand her to be more racist of like, you know, she's not speaking English. Yeah.
I mean, I think that there are things that you do to set character and tone and, you know, establish the world and whatever. And a little bit of it goes a long way, right? And this movie constantly establishes over and over again just what kind of people Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn are. And it feels like, to me, it feels like overkill. Some people may think that's not the case. Maybe, you know, if you talk to S. Craig Zahler, he's going to tell us, you know, he would tell you the point is that you need to feel overwhelmed by the amount of racism. And he's like, and that's the fun of it, is that we're going to paint them as these people that are kind of unpleasant or maybe even completely unpleasant. But then as the story goes on, you're going to feel a little bad for them. You're going to be rooting for them because they're up to like even worse people.
Can I have something to wear? I'm cold.
I didn't understand that, did you?
No. Sounded kind of like dolphin.
You know, the problem with that is movies like The Departed exist. And, you know, State of Grace and movies about like dirty cops and like how cops are fucking Training Day, you know, like these movies exist, dude. Like, so that's if you the theme here of going back to Bone Tomahawk, that's the brilliance of Bone Tomahawk, is there's not really a peer for that movie. I'm sure, you know, we have examples like, I'm not sure, I know for a fact because we did it, Ravenous. There is an example of like a Western style movie that was about cannibals.
Right.
But part of what makes Bone Tomahawk so biting is the dialogue and the acting and the cast that's assembled and shit. And this movie just feels like, why would I watch this when I could watch The Departed? Or what would you say is like because this wants to be a Tarantino movie, obviously. What would be like the closest?
I'm trying to think of a movie where you really dislike the protagonist, but the story's so good that you don't care, right? Because I don't want to. My fear going into this conversation was that somebody that doesn't know us would hear it and they would be like, "Oh, they just don't like the movie." Or in my case, you know, he doesn't like the movie because they're corrupt cops. And it's like, that's not the case at all.
No, yeah. You know, I'm thinking here now with the Tarantino comparison, the Jennifer Carpenter sequence in this would be like if Christopher Walken, after that unbelievable speech, like one of the great 90s monologues in a film, gives Butch the watch and then is brutally gunned down in the street, like while pleading to, you know, tell his son to remember him.
Yeah, he gets gunned down, but also the gold watch doesn't play a role in the story at all.
So as we're talking about, I was thinking about Bone Tomahawk because I just at this point was daydreaming and like, God, what a great movie. So much better than what we're talking about. A great example of what we were talking about in the first half with this Jennifer Carpenter situation. And I said, if she was just a teller that was at the bank when they showed up, you're like, huh? Because I don't know if you remember this. One of the things in Bone Tomahawk that's always been fascinating to me is Sean Young plays the wife of the mayor and has like 3 lines and is like, I think she's the center shot in maybe one of the movie. She's like the focus of what's happening. And, you know, that's kind of interesting. It's like,
yeah,
that's Sean Young. Like that. The first time I watched the movie, I had to go back and, you know, try to figure it out. It's the whole idea of like, and what makes it more frustrating is that sequence that Jennifer Carpenter has at her apartment is like really emotional and really well acted. And it's just like fucking wasted. And it has like no ramifications on anything else that happens. Like I said, if I was being generous, I would say, well, she could be the hostage. She still fucking dies at the end when Mel Gibson shoots her fucking face off. But it's, man, I like was legitimately mad for like the next 15 minutes of the movie. And it's not even like I'm talking, you know, this isn't like a actress or a subject material that's like beloved. It just was because one, we've watched a lot of movies, and Julio and our listeners know you and I can from time to time have really strong opinions about the way certain cards are played in film. But then also when we watch movies, we sit down with our notepads to do these recordings. It's a whole different thing. This isn't a movie I have on in the background while I'm cleaning or, doing a puzzle or some shit, and I'm not really invested, because it just goes back to what we're talking about. That whole, it's so transparent. It just the emotional manipulation of it, and it's such a lazy way to play it. It's as transparent as what you were talking about with the cancel culture thing, and that's even more just like dialogue based. Like Vince Vaughn, he says something idiotic, like not to say what he's saying doesn't have merit, but just it's so shoehorned into the scene where he's like, and the hypocrisy of the media. Like, it's like, what? Why?
Yeah, it made me cringe. And it was too early in the movie for me to have made up my mind about anything. I was just kind of like taking it in. And when that happened, I was like, oh no, what? That scene is not good.
Well, I would argue that it starts good, but then, like you said, it becomes confusing and like, wait, what? Because what they're saying is true, and like it's like the whole concept is interesting. Like Don Johnson has a connection at the news station who tipped him off that this is going to happen.
Yeah,
and he talks about it was bad, but not too bad. That's all fascinating, but then it goes into, like you said, this. But we need our jobs, and people aren't forgiving anymore in this day and age. And then where Don Johnson,
Mel Gibson does a Jim Halpert and looks at the camera.
And then Don Johnson tells Mel Gibson, "You've been dragged across concrete, son. What do you want me to do about it?"
I think that obviously your mileage may vary. Maybe what I'm finding about myself, maybe you are finding it too about yourself, Alex, is that I don't have a problem watching unpleasant characters doing unpleasant things if there is a point to it. And maybe because as we were talking,
good time, baby, good time. That's my example.
Oh, dude, that is I can't believe I didn't think of it, because the closest I was going to was Tyrannosaur. I was like, unpleasant movies I've watched where when it was over, I was like, okay, well, it was worth it. Yes. Tyrannosaur, and it's a very different movie, but at its core, right, if you boil it down to a very complicated protagonist that does some horrible things, they're worse people than him in the movie, but in the end, it's just like kind of like a punishing experience to sit through. But when you get to the end, there was a reason why we went on this journey, and there's a reason why it was unpleasant. It had to be unpleasant, right? If you were going to make this point, it had to get this ugly. I don't feel that at all, which means, with Dragged Across Concrete, which makes it feel gratuitous. I was like, why the fuck were you showing me this woman being abused in the back of the van for the fun of it? Like, what's the point?
Dude, the 3 killer bank robbers or whatever just exist to be faceless, like, instruments of cruelty for no reason.
Yeah.
There's so much more meat on the bone if it gets into a situation where they're at that apartment complex and they get into this standoff there. The fact that they're like these fucking Navy SEAL level tacticians of killing, and the scene where one of them goes in, both scenes of like the setup of how evil they are, where he goes in the gas station and guns down those 2 people, and then those guys in the car that we don't even know who they are, and they both get shot in the head. And then there's this like completely unnecessary racist element to it where he shoots this Hispanic guy and then puts a sombrero over his head while he's dead. You talk about cringe, like. And look, there's positives, and we'll get into them in just a minute. It's what made this movie so frustrating.
Feel like some construction work? That necessary right now? 5%.
Before we get to the positives, just to kind of close out here, one of the things I did want to talk about is at times, like, beyond cringe, you have to turn your head away from the screen level of bad that the dialogue is, and some of like the anchovies thing. Why? There's nothing approaching an explanation for that. And it's not one of those things that's like a tick or, you know, something a character has. It's not forget about it. It's just this thing that this character says, and every time you're like, why? But one of the things that it made me realize about Bone Tomahawk that I'm sure I had come across at some point mentally, but was able to articulate it much better. Bone Tomahawk is a movie based in a long, long time ago time frame, a period of time where we have an understanding of what life was like. We have an understanding of what clothing and, you know, architecture and shit looked like. We can't say to a certainty we know exactly what language was like and how people talk to each other and how they enunciated words and shit like that. So when Richard Jenkins talks the way he does and, you know, just his little phrases and his little, you know, quips in that, I always think of at the beginning where he takes the slurp of soup and he goes, "This tastes like corn." And Kurt Russell tells him it's corn chowder. And he goes, "Well, then things are adding up." You know, normal people don't talk like that, but you watch this movie based in this really fantastical situation and you're fine with it. And Kurt Russell talks a lot like Mel Gibson does in this. Obviously the characters are different. The situations are different, but he talks about the end where he's like, he says he's compromised or he's not going to make the trip back. And Richard Jenkins is like, "Are you sure about that?" "I am." You know, just the way he delivers his lines, it's very similar. The problem is now this guy takes this same idea of like dialogue and language and puts it in a movie that's supposed to be, people have smartphones and people dress like we do right now. And it's, you know, the Juno effect. It's immediately like, people don't fucking talk like this. What is this? And then, like we said in the beginning, also trying to make Mel Gibson the character with like the whimsical quirks of his dialogue. It's, brother, it is not an equation that equals cash. I'll tell you that right now.
I don't think it works. I agree it doesn't work. I will defend the attempt, I think, at giving them some sort of, you know, having their own dialogue, especially because they're partners. And
that's
so
fair.
I was trying to meet the movie halfway, and I was like, yeah, this doesn't sound like, this is not how people talk, but it could be how people that have been working together for however many years in an enclosed space or whatever, you know, they have their own
like
shortcuts.
shorthand with,
exactly.
Yeah.
So the problem is that, like many of the good things or potentially good things in this movie, because the big picture is not good, then it never reaches its potential. Like, I think I'll be okay with this dialogue if the story was more captivating, if it was shorter, you know, and it would be punchier. But when you have long stretches of them doing this kind of like deadpan banter, where, you know, they'll say something and then there's a big pause and then they'll say the next thing and then it feels like it's probably shorter than I remember, but as I think about it, it feels like that exchange about the coffee at the beginning of the movie goes on forever. And I don't think it does. I think that in reality, it's probably like, I don't know, 4 lines each, right? And they're kind of trying to be lighthearted about it, but it just doesn't, I think because the delivery is so monotone and because the dialogue is kind of a little off, you know, what you're saying, people don't talk this way. Yeah, it just doesn't work. Like, E for effort, whatever you want to give it. But it's not, you know, we kind of said the same all the way back in Juno, even more closer, and you brought it up, Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead, right? They had their vernacular and they had certain things that they said over and over. Of course, Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead actually makes an effort to explain to you a little bit of that, kind of like bring you in on the joke. I could have used the something, you know, don't give me the full explanation, but at least a line or something that gives me some insight into anchovies. Like,
yes, I wanted to know.
Like, I thought it was setting it up for it to have some sort of payoff, but it doesn't. It's just like, oh, it's just a quirk. It's just something he says, right? It doesn't work. I wish it did. And they're good actors, so they're already kind of like making it work more than it should almost, but it still doesn't quite get there. Let's switch gears to positive, since it sounded like we're heading that way. we're in real talk now, Alex. Let's get to brass tacks with this Mel Gibson fella.
Mel Gibson. Where to start? I think we'll just stick to this movie for the purposes of, Mel Gibson has moments in this where it made me go, yep. Like when I watch Mel Gibson Never Murdered His Family, but like an example of like when I do come across a Chris Benoit match from time to time and I watch him at work, I go, yep, he was that dude. Mel Gibson, again, to stress, he did not murder his family. But there's moments in this movie where I just thought to myself, yep, he's that dude.
Yep.
Specifically body language and like his command of scenes. And yeah, some of it was kind of that aura was killed from time, not killed, but lessened from time to time with some of the silly dialogue that we're talking about here. But his intensity and just his understanding of the scene where he does the walk by and he's got that hat and those silly glasses on and whatnot. It's a level of understanding, that of what acting is and how to present yourself, that just the way he looks back around his shoulder and shit. It's fantastic. And he's an action star after all. The action sequences, like the standoff and everything, the way he reacts to getting shot and the way he pulls the gun out and like how when the guy surrenders and he still just guns him down, how cold he seems in that scene. Yes. I'm not, if Mel Gibson and I sat down on Christmas Day and shared a meal, I don't know what the fuck we would talk about because I don't know how much we have in common. But, and I also don't agree with many of the things he believes or has said publicly. But I can tell you there's a reason he's been as lauded in his field as he has been from time to time. And there's moments of this movie where that shines through.
I'll handle this.
How?
There's a way. But it's not something that we're going to talk about. Ever.
Yeah, I especially, like, I would single out his realization that things have gone south when it kind of like takes two parts, right? One is when he realizes, oh shit, this is not just a drug deal that we're about to interfere in. This is a bank robbery, where it looks like it's got to be a bank robbery. It's got to be something big, because he starts having not even second thoughts, but it's just, you can see it on his face. And as he
knows he's in too deep.
Yeah. He's like, oh shit, this is going to go badly. And they have that conversation, which I like. That's an exchange that I like, where Vince Vaughnn is trying to suss out, like, okay, we're not going to go in for the money. We're going to try to stop them, right? And they have the money. In the end, they end up not interfering, but they have that exchange where it sounds like there's a part of him that is aligned with Vince Vaughnn and like, well, we're cops. We should really do something. And then it's after they realize that things have gone badly and that people have been shot and they're driving and Vince Vaughnn is freaking out in a very muted way, because this movie, they're not, it's not big on emotional outbursts, but unless it's a female character, apparently. But Vince Vaughnn is just going on and on about how, oh my God, 6 people died and, we just let it happen and blah, 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 blah. And Mel Gibson doesn't get much dialogue there. So it's all on his face as he's driving. And you can tell that he's conflicted about the whole thing. You can tell that he feels bad, but at the same time, he's like, well, fuck it. We're just going to go and we're still going to follow through with this plan and get whatever it is that they got from that bank. And it's all really good. He's a really good actor. I guess I am fortunate, it seems like you are too, in the sense that we are separated enough from like all his bullshit that we can still watch him do work here and be like, all right, well, that's the performance. I don't know how many people would just not watch this movie just on the basis of it starring Mel Gibson. They're like, oh no, like, yeah.
And that's not I'm not going to argue with those people,
Yeah. It's again, I mean, fuck, listen to our top 10 of all time episode on Patreon if you want to hear me go on at length about why my number one is my number one, despite the controversy surrounding it. But in this case, Mel Gibson, I have no problem saying that he is one of the best parts of the movie, like the performances. the character may not be, and the story and that the character is in may not be, but his performance, I think, is good. I think he is almost too good for Vince Vaughn. Like, do you feel like Vince Vaughn measures up, or does he kind of come up short at times?
I'm not sure he's given enough to do that. I will say, this being probably the most serious I've ever seen Vince Vaughn in a movie, at no point did I feel like it's Vince Vaughn, like laughing
Right.
and kind of dismissing the idea of it. I don't know if he has enough, because by comparison, his motivations to be in the situation are not, he wants a nice wedding. Like, that's not, Mel Gibson's dealing with a situation where his wife is chronically ill and addicted to painkillers, and he's worried for his daughter's safety. So the stakes for him are obviously there. And that's kind of what happens with the Vince Vaughn character. The whole reason he's there and the whole reason he gets killed is just because he's like, well, I got nothing better to do, so I'll go with you on this thing. I don't really think I could point to him being the issue. I just think the way his character's written doesn't do him any favors.
I think the writing definitely plays a part. I just know there are a couple of times where I was, and I wish I could remember exactly when, but it was just one of those one-on-ones where it's just him and Gibson. And my thought was, oh man, Gibson is kind of like showing him up. But you're right. Gibson gets to play the intensity, which is more interesting than Vince Vaughn kind of being wishy-washy about what's going on. He's more sympathetic, right? Like I like the fact that there are a couple of times where he tries to be the voice of conscience and try to steer them in the right direction, but it kind of adds up to nothing. Maybe I would retroactively enjoy the whole thing more if his character arrived somewhere other than, oh, well, she said no. I guess I'm going to die now.
It wasn't what I wanted to hear.
But moving on from like one pairing to another, and the thing I will be most complimentary about in this movie, and hilariously, it does kind of come back to dialogue for as much shit as I've been talking. My favorite scene in the whole movie was during the getaway when Henry and Michael Jai White, basically what happens is Biscuit is his character's name, Michael Jai White. Jai. I think he has read the tea leaves and he knows he's not getting out of this situation alive. And so Henry, realizing where they are geographically, starts talking about when they were kids and how his mom had a birthday party for him out there. And it's this long scene of a back and forth, and you can see Biscuit, White, loosening up and remembering and becoming happy once again throughout this whole discussion they have, and talking about how he got the biggest slice of birthday cake, and he says the birthday boy gets the biggest piece. That's day one mom shit, I think he says, or something. And that's the scene in the movie. I made allusion in the first half to like feeling tense. I loved their dialogue back and forth in that scene, but it really did add to the tension of the situation, because it was just like this feeling of impending doom, dread, surrounded what was going on. But their relationship's really good. And the guy, Tory Kittles, the guy who plays Henry, is quite fantastic. And I've seen Michael Jai White in a lot of stuff, be it, your straight to streaming martial arts movies. As I mentioned, he's in The Dark Knight, very infamously. He's the victim of the magic trick the Joker pulls.
Ta-da!
Yeah. Triple Threat is a movie that I did for one of our QVRs, and he's a big part of that movie. And he's never been someone that, I think of as like this, reliable, strong actor. And in this, honestly, one of my takeaways was he was... him and Kittles were one of the strongest parts of this. There's scenes there when they realize shit's gone awry and they're trying not to sell it because they know these guys have their guns on them, and they just realize the situation's so fucked up. That would be what I'm most complimentary of, is those two characters and their interactions throughout this movie.
It's a really good scene. You're right. I think I remember feeling a little, at the beginning, I felt annoyed at the digression. Because by now I knew what was going to happen, right? Like, because that happens. It's like right after the whole thing with the woman needing to pee, or or right before, but whatever the case is, like something really horrible has happened. And so now I was like, oh, we're going to tell story now.
Yeah.
But you're right. The performances are so good and their chemistry is so good. The story is affecting and it serves a purpose because you're right. Michael J. White is really getting into his head and Henry's trying to get him out of there. And it's like, just relax. We're just going to get out of this. We just have to write it out. And so there is a whole purpose to that scene. It's not just like, oh, well, now we're going to bullshit for like 5 minutes. And it really works. But you just, as you're saying this, I'm like, it's the same guy writing that dialogue, right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
So, I mean, some of it is situational. It makes more sense. Like the context of this scene and this conversation is a lot more compelling than, most of the other contexts in the movie. But also the performances and I think that there's something to be said for the fact that just the Henry character is more likable overall. And so it's easier to, you feeling some sympathy towards him. You've seen exactly where he comes from. You know exactly how he ended up here. And yes, he's played a part in it, but obviously he didn't. It's not like he walked into this, I think, with his eyes wide open. Like, do you think at the end when Mel Gibson kind of throws it in his face, right? Henry says, well, the deal was that nobody was going to get killed and so on. And Gibson tells him, oh, is that what you tell yourself?
Yeah.
Do you think that this guy, Henry, like actually walks into this deal knowing that it was going to be this bad? Because I didn't think so. If I was supposed to get that, I didn't think that at all. I thought that he'd gotten blindsided by how brutal everything got. Like, I don't know that he knew who he was dealing with necessarily. So when this is happening and he's having this conversation with Biscuit, I'm like, yeah, man, I hope that you guys make it. Because it's so I think that that's something else that works, right? Like maybe if I had that same feeling of sympathy or empathy or whatever, towards Mel Gibson and Vince Vaughn, I'll find their dialogue and their quirks a little more endearing. But I'm pretty removed from it, so I'm just kind of watching it in a more clinical way. I was like, why are you guys talking like that? What's with the percentages? But that's a really good call. That guy is probably like the most consistently good performance in the movie, and he probably benefits from the fact that there's big chunks of the movie where he's not in it. So
yeah,
we don't get tired of him.
And you got all pissed and shit because your mom gave me the biggest piece.
Birthday boy gets the biggest piece. That's in the mom's handbook.
Yeah. But she probably knew my mom wasn't taking care of me too good.
Well, Julio, we've said a lot about this, and we're obviously very complimentary about the director in some of his previous work. What do you think it is? I guess we have one other movie we need to watch before we can really comment on it, but it just seems like I think the easiest way to summarize my feelings is it feels like it's trying too hard.
See, I can say that as a joke, but I don't. If that's the case, I don't know what it's trying to do. It's trying too hard to do what? Because
that's fair.
Unless the whole thing is like it's trying too hard to top Bone Tomahawk, which I made a joke in the Trader's Corner. One, it's unnecessary, but I can see. Okay, I can see that being a scenario.
Just overthought it, man.
Yeah, but right, if you're the man who made Bone Tomahawk, you're like, well, there's no way that I already peaked. So I need to, what am I going to do next? Another Western that's kind of like fucked up? I can't. So I make like a crime movie, but how do I make it more than my first movie, right? Do I amp up the gore? Do I just make a very specific effort to make the audience really uncomfortable? And that's really what I wanted to ask you. It kind of like it slipped my mind because you watch more horror than me, and a lot of horror, as we've discussed on the show sometimes, like a lot of horror is just about getting a very visceral reaction from the audience, from you. Like it's like, why are we watching this really unpleasant thing? Oh, because that's the whole point. The point is to like make you uncomfortable or make you, disgust you or whatever. So that could just be the whole justification behind this, right? Like, as Chris Zahler wants to show you this really ugly world, and so every big scene is going to be about shocking you and rattle you and whatever. But, you just spend like all of October watching movies that were trying to do that to you. So compared to that, like, does this feel, is that what is like where the try hard comes in? Like, it's trying too hard to shock you?
I think it's trying too hard to be like sharp. To your point, though, it doesn't know what the fuck it wants to say. That's the biggest problem. It's trying too hard to put these very real type situations in front of you, things like racism, police brutality and shit, and senseless killing. But what is accomplished by that? Like, what does it say at the end? The message in Bone Tomahawk, it just at its base level is, good triumphing over evil. And here, I don't even know what the baseline message is. Stick to your word.
Yeah, when they make their deal at the end, I thought that, okay, so that's what the movie's about. I guess showing us that this is how you achieve racial harmony, right? You go through all this shit and then eventually you make a compromise and you're like, fuck it, 60-40, I'll take it. But that's not the point of it, because they end up, Henry ends up killing Mel Gibson in self-defense, but still, right? Like, so it's the point that there is no hope for racial harmony. It's like the tensions have gotten so strong, the things have gotten so complicated that never in a million years would Mel Gibson and Henry trust each other. So, one of them was going to die either way. Is that the message? I was like, well, if that's the message, I wish it was clearer and he wasn't like all confused with all the other bullshit that's happening in the movie.
It's weird. It's a movie that I found a lot of things redeeming and fascinating about, but because of knowing where it came from, my overall feeling was one of disappointment. Truthfully, under different circumstances, I could potentially be higher on it, but not with that Jennifer Carpenter sequence in it. That legitimately like made me mad. I was like, man, fuck this.
There's no way to fix that. Even if this was directed by someone else, or if this was the first S. Craig Zahler movie you were watching, even if Mel Gibson didn't have the history he has, just take all the outside influences out. That segment of the movie is just bad. Agreed.
Yeah, every other thing we've expressed so far, and it could be sunshine and rainbows, and that would still be like, well, hold on, we done got off the tracks here. With all that being said, I did say it was the highest I ever was in my mind watching this was 3.5 stars. I did say that the Jennifer Carpenter thing took an entire star off. I'm struggling. I haven't made my Letterboxd review yet, but there are some things we talked about in here that I was like, yeah. So I may end up at 3 instead of 2.5, but this is like C- is what I would give this in terms of a letter grade. There's flashes of brilliance here and there, cinematically, directing, acting wise, what have you. But for the last time, I promise, it ain't no Bone Tomahawk, and it's also just not that good of a movie, regardless of what you bring into it. So C- for me, Julio. What about yourself?
I'm gonna go with 2.5. 2.5. I think that most people are probably surprised that it's not lower, because I feel like I've just mostly focused on the negatives here, but that's because those are the things that we can expand on more. So 2.5, hopefully Cell Block 99 proves to be much better. And then I can just say, well,
coming soon to Contrarians After Hours.
Yeah. 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Hopefully that's going to be our final assessment.
I think in closing, an important thing, like you were calling out there's a lot of movies we do that we end up at our Lindsay Lohan movie over on Patreon. We just did Our Little Secret.
Yeah.
I think we both 2.5, 3 stars. It was like the same range as this, but we were glowing about it.
Yep.
The thing with this movie is the discussion points are its missteps.
Yeah.
So if this is your first time listening to the show and you've made it this far, God bless. But and just to even Paul, because this is karma for you talking shit about Passion. You and Ben talking mad shit about that movie recently. But I'll say that, we greatly appreciate your patronage, but that's the point I wanted to make of the conversation about this movie is its flaws, not necessarily its positives. And that is not the case for every bad movie. There's plenty of times you can just focus on the good in a shit movie. But anyway, Julio, I'm sorry. I realized that as you were saying it, that we'd mostly been harping on things, but then I was like, well, no, but that's the story of the movie, because this on paper seems like it should be a fucking slam dunk. And in the end, it's kind of a mess.
I think that line was obliterated
The day men started saying, we're pregnant, and their wives were.
That's it for Dragged Across Concrete. Now let's drag ourselves, Alex, to the next episode, which is going to be the first episode of the year 2025.
My God.
We're going to stay in theme, Alex. The last 2 years, we've started the Denzel Washington movie. We started 2023 with The Bone Collector. We started 2024 with Ricochet. So how could we not start 2025 with another Denzel vehicle, this time the Tony Scott action epic, I think? Man on Fire. Have you seen it?
No, but it's 2.5 hours. We're doing 2 of these things back to back.
Yeah, but it's Denzel. Everybody loves Denzel.
Yeah. Well, hold on. Mickey Rourke's in it. Christopher Walken, Dakota Fanning. Oh, she must have been like a child in that movie.
He's her bodyguard, I think.
It is Tony Scott, so, we'll see what we can make of it.
I'm sure we'll be fine. So, start 2025 with us and Denzel. Man on Fire. That's coming up next. And then on the Patreon feed, how are we closing December? Well, as Alex alluded to, our Christmas episode should be out by now, is on Our Little Secret, the latest Lindsay Lohan holiday extravaganza, available on Netflix. As you can tell from the comparison to Dragged Across Concrete, we enjoyed that one a lot more, even though they have the same score pretty much. We also, by now, on our Patreon, you should have gotten that nice surprise, which was our Gremlins commentary. It's right there. Watch Gremlins with Alex and I talking through it. It's a lot of fun to record. And then for QVRs, Alex, we still have Perfect Blue for you and Ace Attorney for me. Those are demanded by Stu from Stu World Order. I think you figure out the Perfect Blue is an anime. Ace Attorney probably is as well. Haven't checked it yet. Have a few more days to watch and record that. But that's coming up. Oh, and Man on Fire. I didn't mention it. That's Jamie Russell. Good old Jamie is throwing a Denzel movie at us. And finally, Contrarians After Hours. Alex, what are you bringing to Contrarians After Hours this time?
Man, I've not been watching anything recently. I've really fallen behind on my movie watching. October, I just set the bar too high, man. But fortunately, I do some stuff other in life than watch movies. And I recently took a trip to Tennessee and made my way into Kentucky for a little bit of that. I had a lot of fun. Got to go to the Muhammad Ali Museum and got to go see the Cincinnati Bengals play the Tennessee Titans. So got to be in the presence of Joe Burrow, which is very nice. So I'll just be talking about my recent trip. It was actually cold there, which was dope because here in Texas, it's still like fucking 78 and it's about to be Christmas Day. So I will be recapping my December trip, my voyage and collection of miles, recapping meals, new sightseeing, all that type of shit. So talking about my recent vacation, Julio, what are you discussing on After Hours?
Well, Alex, I also took a trip to the movies. I went to see...
That was the most Greg Turkington transition ever.
Subconsciously, I think they're just getting in my head. Courtesy of our friend and patron Eddie Strait, who's a bona fide critic and gets invitations to advanced screenings, I was his +1 to Nosferatu, a movie that if you had asked me maybe 2 months ago, I would have told you, why the fuck would I watch that? I didn't like The Witch. I didn't like The Lighthouse. I didn't like The Northman. Why would I watch another one? At this point, it would be on me. But hey, it was an advanced screening on an IMAX. I like hanging out with Eddie. Sure, why not? So I went to saw Nosferatu. I'll tell you all about it there. And also, just on my own, there's no excuse for this. I did this to myself, kind of like for the fun of it. I went and saw Craven the Hunter, the latest misguided attempt by Sony Studios to create some sort of a Spider-Man villains universe. They did Venom, they did Morbius, they did Madam Web, which I guess she's not a villain, and now Craven the Hunter. Spider-Man movies without Spider-Man, just starring Spider-Man villains. Who's running Sony? What is this? Well, anyway, I knew it was going to be stupid. I just turned my brain off and I was like, I just want to get out of the house. Yeah, so I'll tell you about that. That's going to be your after hours, plus all the other stuff we mentioned. Just go to patreon.com/Contrarian Prime if it sounded interesting and see how you would like to join the Contrarian supplements. And now, Alex, let's get out of here.
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. We'll catch y'all next time. Welcome to our end credits.
Or as we usually call them, our perennial plugs.
We start off by giving thanks to the Festive Years who provide our opening and closing tracks. They kick us off with Last Stand and take us home with Summer of 99. Be sure to head over to thefestiveyears.com for any and all Festive Years needs.
Our friend and fellow podcaster Hans Rothgieser is the man behind our logo and all the art you see related to our show. Reach out to him and let him know how much you like that little tomato. His email address is mildemonios@hotmail.com and his website is mildemonios.pe. That's MILDEMONIOS. Hans, thank you for all your support.
For those interested in the regularly absurd world of professional wrestling, Joe and the boys over at latenightgrin.com have you covered. Tell them the Contrarians sent you.
And we like to close with special thanks to our social media team of Zoe Perez and Corey Ari. Each of the social media accounts we mentioned in the introduction look as good as they do because of their work.
So that'll do it for this episode of The Contrarians, where we're right and you're wrong, and we will catch you next time.
Just for old time's sake, I really don't care who you see and how much money you make together, who he knows. Just promise me you'll wear that dress and you won't forget that some of the main